This week on Inside Olympia, we're heading into the busy summer travel and tourism season in the Northwest. And the World Cup is coming. How prepared is Washington's ferry and rail system to accommodate the crowds? And what does the future hold for these vital transportation services? On the program, John Vezina of Washington State Ferries and Kirk Fredrickson of Washington's Passenger Rail Services.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
Welcome to Inside Olympia. The state of Washington operates the largest ferry system in the U.S. and a popular Amtrak rail service along the I-5 corridor. Both systems face challenges related to equipment, funding, and operational constraints. Washington's ferries are old, and replacements take years to build. New Amtrak train cars are coming, but they won't be here in time for this summer's World Cup, and they won't change the fact that Amtrak trains must defer to freight trains since they share the same tracks. This hour, we're going to go in-depth on ferry and rail service in Washington State. In our second half, we'll talk with the head of passenger rail at the Department of Transportation. But joining me first is John Vezina, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Washington State Ferries. Welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Tucking in to do this. So we'll talk short term and sort of longer term, but we should start out by noting that this is an important year for the Washington State Ferry System. It is your 75th birthday, your diamond anniversary. What's planned? How are you going to celebrate 75 years of plying the waters?
Yeah, 3/4 of a century since the state of Washington decided that to have the funding and infrastructure necessary to run this system, that it needed to be run by the government. And so we're excited about June 1st coming up. It is a big year with June 1st, and then just right after that, the World Cup. So we're looking at different ways we can celebrate. The Mariners kind of beat us to the punch with their ferry boats that they're handing out with food at the terminals. We'll be selling them on boats soon. But you should expect in the next couple of weeks us to roll out what our plan is and how we'll celebrate.
Can you just tell us a little bit about these Mariners ferries? They've been very popular, and as you noted, they will be offered through the ferry system. Why are people so excited about a plastic miniature ferry?
Yeah, you know, we hear people talk a lot about ferries are iconic. It's what's on Grey's Anatomy. It's where you take your friends when they visit. And even after a decade at WSF, I don't think I understood until friends from Maine were sending me news stories about these plastic boats that they're selling. And 2 weekends ago, Sunday Night Baseball, they did a thing showing it and saying to recognize the 75th anniversary. Friends are texting me and saying, can you get me one of these? So,
we're going to start seeing them on eBay.
I think you might. I mean, people are turning them the lights and all sorts of things. So it's a fun way to mark this anniversary.
And there will be more to be announced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because you noted the 75th anniversary of sort of creating a public system, there are private ferry systems, and in fact, BC Ferries went private. There was privatization some years ago. I don't want to rain on the 75th birthday parade here, but does it still make sense to have a public ferry system? Has there been talk of privatization given the challenges?
Yeah, you know, I would obviously argue that having the state do it and the support we've seen from Governor Ferguson and the legislature to help us, right the ship, provide more service. Last year, we had 7,000 more sailings than the year before, and yet 400 less cancellations. So we're coming back. We're back up to 18-boat service this summer. And, it's a conversation I think that's fair for the public to have. Is it the best use of funds when state transportation funding is tight and people in Wenatchee need roads and Yakima need bridges? Is this the best way? I think for people who live on islands and rely on us as part of the state highway system, if you look at BC Ferries, what they pay their executives, what they charge, I think you would argue that, yes, this is a good use of our funding. And also, we provide service for 22 hours a day. I think if you privatize and you're just going to maximize profits, likely you're not going to have midday sailings. You're going to really focus on those times with heavy commuter use, and that would be the detriment to a lot of our customers.
Well, let's talk about the current state of the system, which, as you just made a nod to, has struggled in recent years. And there's been a real effort to try to get the, in some cases, decades-old ferries that were still operating, operational back on the water. So you mentioned 18 vessels, and is that out of 23 total that are operational?
21.
So it's really a 3-boat margin.
Yeah, and you need, the weather here is not always perfect. You need to be doing work on these boats all year round, and including stuff like painting and things that you can only really do in the summer. So before COVID, when we had the boat going to Sydney, we had 19 boats in the summer, 18 in the shoulder season, and then 17 in winter. So now we're at 18 and going down to 17 in winter.
You're not doing that Sydney run, and I'll probably ask you about that in a moment. But so as we head into this busy summer months, the World Cup is coming, obviously. Yep. There's going to be added demand. What does the operational capacity look like, and sort of how tenuous is it if you have a breakdown? What would the ripple effect be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll credit Steve Nevy, the Deputy Secretary, the work he's done to really focus on service with being in the governor's cabinet, the direction from the governor. And then we have a man who's new to leading our vessels department who's terrific. Worked his way up from an oiler. He's been with us for 13 years. He now runs that department. And he has committed to having 20 of those 21 boats available this summer. So we need 18 to run full service. So we'll have 2 ready and crewed at Eagle Harbor for the June 11th to July 19th of the World Cup. We're going to have extra staff on the boats and at terminals. So we know there's an influx. I hear just anecdotally that staying in Seattle is expensive, so a lot of people want to stay in Kitsap County. So we're going to
ferry over to the games.
And ferry over the games. We're going to really focus on those Central Sound routes, Edmonds, Kingston, Seattle, Bainbridge, Seattle, Bremerton, so that we have that capacity and that consistency. And as you said, the boats are getting older. Forrest and his team and vessels, and all credit to the engine room and our Eagle Harbor maintenance facility, they're focused on having those 20 boats. So if one does go out unexpectedly, we have that redundancy.
There's the boats and whether they break down, but there's also the staffing. You did just note that you're staffing up, but generally, if I understand correctly, you are crewed at the minimum Coast Guard staffing requirement. So sometimes we have cancellations just because somebody doesn't make it to the boat and they therefore can't go. How are you going to try to prepare for those eventualities? Yeah, especially again during the summer peak months.
Right. Just in general, and again, credit to Steve and his leadership coming from the private sector and seeing that in the past we'd expected people to go. The biggest constraint is people going from unlicensed to licensed deck or engine room. So creating programs, especially on the deck, so that we have more people. Those programs are working very well. So we have the people we need. But as you said, we have traditionally been crewed, just the Coast Guard sets a minimum amount of crewing.
And that's what you're funded to do.
That's what we're funded by route and by boat. And it's all safety-based, right? That's what we all want. So they have set those numbers. Someone gets a flat tire on the way to work, has a sick child, and they call at the last minute. It takes time. So the legislature has given us some funding to overcrew a couple of those positions, and then during the World Cup, we'll be ratcheting that up a bit so that isn't a problem. If someone does have an emergency on the way to work or when they get to work, we have some redundancy.
Okay, so I know you can't make promises, but what is the ferry system's goal and intent? What do you want to telegraph to the Washington State travelers and visitors coming to the state this summer regarding what they can expect for ferry service?
We know that this is a big event for the city of Seattle and for Washington State. We use the run-up to the Super Bowl and the amount of people we had going to those playoff games as a test. Our goal is to make sure that if not every single sailing, if a boat comes out, we have one that's immediately available to put in so that people, especially on game days, but every day if they're going to fan zones in Bremerton or in Seattle, that they know they can rely on our boats to get there.
There were issues last year with the summer ferry reservation system. I know it just opened up for this summer. How's that going? Do you think that those issues have been ironed out?
Yeah, we just last week we had the reservation system. This is with the community support. When we instituted the reservation system, we did a 2-month, 2-week, 2-day. So 30% of the boats are reserved on those, and then we save 10% for emergency vehicles, other things that might come up on the day. This 2-month release is always the biggest, right before summer. And it's people in the San Juans and Port Townsend, Coopville, sometimes competing with people from Iowa who want to come for their vacation. We had over 40,000 reservations made that day. In the past, we've improved steadily on our capacity to make multiple reservations. We had a little bit of a glitch first thing in the morning, but that got straightened out. And just that, having tens of thousands of people make reservations that day, it's getting better.
Tom Bonsi, writing in the Washington State Standard recently, talked about the Anacortes to Sydney, BC run that has not been brought back after it was halted during COVID. And there's frustration of those communities because they came to depend on it, and it's a longer trip without it. And the answer from the agency was it's still in the plans, but not anytime soon. What can you tell us about getting that line back online, and why isn't it happening sooner? Why not this summer?
Yeah, as we came out of COVID and we looked at our service, both the crewing we had available at the time and the number of vessels, we realized we really had to focus on our domestic service. When I talk to folks who are relying on us to get to chemotherapy appointments, to get to work, to have their grandkids come across and visit, we understand how important that core domestic service is. So unfortunately, we don't have that 19th vessel available that we can maintain these older boats, do the work we need to keep them in service, and run that. I would point to people who are worried because we understand for Anacortes, San Juans, it's a really big economic driver. People coming through there on their way north. I would point out it's still mentioned in everything we do. It's mentioned on our website. It's something we absolutely intend to do. There is something called SOLAS, Safety of Life at Sea. It's a special level of certification that boats that travel internationally have to do. We don't currently have a SOLAS boat, but we're working on which boat we will make SOLAS or bring back up to SOLAS standards. So when we get new boats starting in 2030, and if we don't have to retire them, and that'll be a decision the governor and the legislature make of will we have some redundancy or will we retire as we get new ones. But as soon as we have a 19th boat that we can keep stable service, make sure we do that domestic service for our customers and add that, we'll be right back there.
But the reality check here is we're still maybe 5 more years out at minimum before you might be able to restore that route?
4 to 5, as soon as we start getting those new boats.
I want to ask you about what it's going to take to modernize and update this ferry fleet. And obviously, work is underway. Let's start with the contract with Eastern Shipbuilding Group in Florida to build, if I'm correct, 3 new ferries for Washington. These will be hybrid electric boats. Have you been able to go down and visit yet? Where does the construction of the first one stand at this point?
So a couple of years ago, the legislature, and just not to dwell on the past, but between 2000 and now, we had 7 boats built. And that's partly because of I-695 passing in 1999. They're expensive. So we've only had 7 boats, which is why
that was the cap on
license plate tabs.
License tabs. Yeah. So that you're just noting that
constricted our funding.
The funding to build new
and funding, transportation funding, that the legislature had to do things like building $350 million boats. So a couple of years ago, the legislature changed the law that while giving us $1.3 billion to build new boats, they also said, we understand the importance of shipbuilding in Washington and Puget Sound, but we need to get boats, let's go out of state as well. So with tariffs and steel prices and other things, we signed a contract for 2 with an option for a 3rd with that money. So not 5, but, we're hopeful that we'll get those 3. The bidder that came in for the least amount of money by a significant amount was Eastern Shipyard in Florida. We have a great team, a system electrification team working on those. My boss, Steve, and I are going to go down. We have not been to the shipyard yet, but we're going to go visit on May 4th and do an extensive review of the shipyard, the work they're doing. I know that they're already, the design's done. They finalized that based on what we gave them. And now they're getting together so that probably in August, they'll start cutting steel and laying the keel.
And what would the date of delivery ideally, optimally be?
So it was 5 years from when we signed the contract, and that was last summer. Appreciate the support again Governor Ferguson gave us in making that decision, and so we're well on our way. So shipbuilding, it takes time, and safety is always the highest priority. So it should be another 4 years from this summer, getting the first boat in 2030, the second in 2031, and then the third in 2032.
And do you have a sense yet, you said you're going to go visit, but do you have a sense yet of, because typically, there was this requirement to build in Washington, and as you've noted, they were allowed to go for a bid for an out-of-state builder, but I would imagine you need to build a relationship with that contractor. Do you have a sense of how that's going so far? Are they going to be up to the task? Do you have confidence?
Yeah, David Sowers, who runs our system electrification program, he reports to me. He talks to Steve and me often. He's been down there a couple of times. We're actually hiring someone to live in Florida and monitor the shipbuilding. As we get closer, the engine room's crew will have to be familiar with the boat. So we are talking to them all the time, monitoring it. A team goes down monthly just to check in, make sure we're doing it. One of the things I appreciate about the leadership that David brings is the relationship he's established with the head of the shipyard, and they talk several times a week about how things are going. So, it's a complicated business, but I'm confident in the direction we're going.
There's also a proposal, again, with the idea of how can you get more boats on the water to restore 2 long-retired ferries. There's a sale leaseback arrangement proposal from Stabbert Marine, is
Yep.
it? What do you guys think of that pitch? How viable is that? Is it something that's being seriously explored and considered or not?
Absolutely. We have the 2 old boats that are at our Eagle Harbor maintenance facility. I was
It's
on
the
them.
Hayak and the
La Jolla.
Okay.
I was on them a couple weeks ago. The birds and the moss have very definitely found a home there.
Well, and are they too far gone? Is a question.
And Stabbert doesn't think so. And so there's a couple of people out there. I heard from someone today, we could recycle them. Recycling boats is very difficult. The closest place we've found is Brownsville, Texas. And this is something that BC Ferries is also struggling with. They have decommissioned boats. They're actually thinking about building a recycling center that we might be able to use. But
By the way, were these the 2 you were also trying to sell?
yes, yeah.
Which has not been easy either.
That's not been easy. We did sell the Elwha to Nichols Brothers Shipyard. They're using it on Lake Washington for office space next to their shipyard. Every ferry system keeps the boats as long as possible because they're so challenging to build. So we didn't find anyone who wanted them. So we are, early summer, we'll put out an RFP for folks interested either in recycling or Stabbert. My goal, honestly, is that someone takes them away and doesn't bring them back. So Stabbert, I think if we go with their proposal, they would take them, review, and see if they could get them back to operating status. And then it would be a conversation with Governor Ferguson and the legislature about, okay, here's a path forward. Do you want to enter into a lease agreement that after they finish that work, the state would lease them back?
There's also a proposal from Switch Marine to do a zero-emission hydrogen propulsion ferries, I guess. What do you think? And I guess that there's going to be a study on this. No commitment, but what is the thinking on this proposal? And am I remembering that this would be for the San Juans in particular?
For the inter-island boat. So they really feel that is a viable option. The inter-island boat, currently our oldest boat, I joke, although it's not a joke, it's the only thing in Washington older than me. It's 67 years old. It's operating up there. We're going to have to keep it going another 5 years at least till we get new boats. So it's going to be in its 70s. So we're very interested in other propulsion types. I think, one of the things we'll be looking closely at is we have to operate and maintain these boats. So does it make sense to create an entirely different propulsion system that we would have to teach people, hire people to operate while we're also keeping diesel and hybrid vessels in? But we're very open to all these proposals and excited to see what comes back with them.
Remind us of the plan under Governor Inslee was to go to all electric, to retrofit and go to all battery, right? And then am I remembering this correctly? So
no,
it was always going to be hybrids?
There was a discussion, and what we decided after looking at it before it got very far is we live in a seismic area where the grid could go down. We want to have that redundancy of diesel engines in case there was ever an earthquake, so there'll be hybrid.
So the hybrid, okay, so then what changed is Governor Ferguson came in and said, rather than pulling boats out to do that retrofit while he tries to stabilize the system, we're going to delay the conversion.
Our three biggest boats, the Jumbo Mark IIs, those three of 21, they burn 26% of our fuel, therefore they put out 26% of our greenhouse gas emissions. We converted the first, building new hybrid electric, that's being done all over. Converting was different. It took much longer. We estimated 9 months, it took 22. So seeing that when Governor Ferguson came in, he said, let's hold off on the next two. They're going to have their midlife propulsion work done because they're older, but let's hold off and focus on service, and so that's what we're doing.
So what is the plan to get the other two converted? Is that even on the planning horizon at this point?
So I'm going to go just lightly into the weeds. We are directed to keep our vessels operating for 60 years. Cruise companies, fishing boats, other things, Coast Guard, they usually keep theirs for 20, 25. So about midway through, as they get to 25, 30 years, you got to upgrade their propulsion systems. Some of the propulsion systems we have, the companies who made them either don't make them anymore or don't exist. So we have people at our maintenance facility building parts for engines because the companies don't make them anymore. So we have to do some work on the propulsion control systems of the other two to keep them operating, but we can delay the decision on whether or not we convert them later when we get new boats. So we'll do that control system work and wait on the conversion.
So it's not a for sure that it'll happen.
It's a conversation that the governor says he wants to have after World Cup.
And the one that was retrofitted, I understand, had some initial hiccups. How is it operating mechanically?
It's doing really well. I think I would be remiss if I didn't represent my shipbuilding colleagues who said, anytime you do that sort of work and you bring a vessel back into service, you recommission a vessel, you're going to have those issues. So it's actually out of service right now, just doing planned, regular work, and we expect when it comes out in the next couple of weeks, it'll be recommissioned and keep operating the way it was, sometimes on batteries, and then as we electrify the system at the end of the decade, full batteries as often as possible.
But that boat, which boat is that?
The Wenatchee.
Is it out of service right now?
It's planned maintenance right
Planned
now,
maintenance.
and then when it comes out, that recommissioning will be done.
The governor did have a proposal to the legislature to borrow $1 billion to buy 3 additional new ferries. The legislature did not go for that. I think there was also money in there to keep the oldest boats going. What are the implications of not getting that commitment from the legislature this year?
I've said it before, but just really appreciative of the focus that Governor Ferguson has brought, and he did make that proposal. I think it was his way of signaling his seriousness about these new boats and how we need to get them. And the 3 oldest boats we have, $50 million each, it was $150 million total, to keep them running until we get new ones. As he worked with the legislature, I think they came to an understanding that in a short supplemental session, that was a big commitment. They needed further discussion. So they decided to defer and have that conversation next year.
Obviously, you don't have the money to build beyond the 2 or possibly 3 in Florida right now.
Yeah.
Does the system have the money to keep the existing vessels operational?
Yeah, the legislature, with support of the governor, they were very generous this year with preservation money. We have the preservation dollars we need to keep them going. We will need, that's a conversation for next year in the longer session, but for now we do have the resources we need.
There was also a proposal from a state representative, Nance, that actually got some bipartisan support and some momentum this year, but fell short because there was also some kind of intra-party fighting over it. But to try to bring back the Mosquito fleet, the passenger-only ferries plying the waters of yesterday. What does the ferry system think about? I know we have some passenger ferries, but what do you all think about trying to expand that and bring back something that was pretty common in the past?
We're agnostic. We have really good relationship with both Kitsap Transit and King County Fast Ferries. Their leadership, we talk all the time. We see that as complementing our service, not competing with it. Really pleased to see that there'll be some extra service this summer for World Cup. What the legislature decides to do as far as other passenger-only ferries, I know it's something the governor spoke in support of, but how they do that it doesn't really impact our service. I think everyone was clear it wouldn't be operated by the state, so we'll just work closely with whoever's there.
Doesn't have a lot of impact on you or your operations.
Doesn't.
What is the in terms of thinking about the future of this system, its reliability, its affordability? You have to staff these ferries. We've been talking about the baby boomers retiring for a long time now, but who are the future ferry captains of the system? What about the people to work the decks and work in the engine rooms? Those people we don't often see if we're riding the ferry. What is that kind of recruitment and retention and staffing needs of the future look like? By the way, I'm thinking these are jobs that might not easily be replaced by AI.
I certainly hope not. And you struck my heart there when baby boomers. I turned 65 on Saturday, so I feel that
Happy early
myself.
birthday.
Thank you. One of the things in the leadership that Steve's provided, but also at WSDOT in general, as we look at crewing our boats, and honestly, our Eagle Harbor Maintenance Facility, our warehouse, our terminals, and our headquarters, we need to break out of the mold of past what ferry systems looked like. All due credit to the folks who got us here for 75 years, but we can't operate a system with just straight white men. We need women, we need people of color, we need the LGBT folks. Anybody in Washington who's qualified, these are good paying state jobs. They have pensions, they have sick leave, they have annual leave. So we're really looking, and it's exciting now when I go into an engine room or a wheelhouse and I see a woman who's a chief engineer or a captain. When we fly the pride flag in June, to see the people people working there who feel seen and represented. So I think us doubling down on having a ferry system that looks more like Washington State and hiring the most qualified people, regardless of who they are, it's really paying dividends and where we need to head in the future.
Couple last questions. I asked you about the reservation system a little while ago. There was an effort to upgrade the ticketing and reservation system. There was a contract that was recently pulled back after spending several $1 million. Can you just explain to us briefly what happened there and what the plan now is?
Yeah, as I said earlier, we had our system is based on this release of 2-month, 2-week, 2-day, and it's not something that there's off-the-shelf system for. So we had a group who looked at it a couple of years ago. They found a company who said, "Oh, we can do that." And we worked with them for the last couple of years. I think they tried really hard. We certainly did. And in the end, we couldn't get there. We couldn't develop a system that did what we needed to do. And as you said, we'd spent significant resources, and we decided to, rather than spending more on a system we weren't confident we could move forward with, it was in the best interest of the taxpayers in the system to end that contract and then focus on the things we'd learned and come back.
So you don't have somebody in mind to go to next?
We're about to release an RFP and based on what we've learned so far.
Is public Wi-Fi coming to Washington State ferries this summer?
It is on a boat already, and I just today got an email from our technology services department saying we want to get customer feedback because we think it's working well on that boat and we have a path forward.
And just lastly, are we on track to electrify and modernize this fleet by 2040, which is increasingly just around the corner? It's not 2030, but 2040, especially given the timelines for building boats. Is that a realistic timeline at this point?
I think it's wholly realistic. We already have the Wenatchee running, partly on batteries, and we're going to start. Today an RFQ goes out for a company to build we have a design for the terminal electrification for the company that's going to build that. Probably take 3 years. We think at the end of the decade we'll have that ready. We'll have new boats. The first 2 new boats will go in Clinton, Mukilteo. We'll electrify in Clinton, and then Bremerton will be next. So we need that at Coleman, and we've already got the Wenatchee. So I think it's wholly realistic.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. John Vezina, Deputy Assistant Secretary at Washington State Ferries. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Happy birthday again to the system, and happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
And when we return from ferries to trains, we get an update on the state's Amtrak Cascades service. Back after this.
It will dwarf Katrina. It'll be absolutely the largest thing that we will have had to have dealt with in our country. We know the clock is ticking.
With only 15 minutes or so, that's not a lot of time to evacuate.
Welcome back to Inside Olympia. Our focus is transportation this week, from ferries to passenger rail. Joining me now is Kirk Fredrickson, Manager of Passenger Rail Services at the Washington State Department of Transportation. It's kind of a fun transition to go from ferries to rail.
Yep.
We've got fans of both in this state and region, and also people who rely on these modes of transportation. I'll start where I did with ferries as we talk about the Amtrak Cascades. We're coming into a busy summer travel season, and also these World Cup FIFA games that are going to be bringing people from all over. And there are games up in Vancouver, games in Seattle. People are going to be wanting to get between the two destinations. How is Washington Passenger Rail, how is Amtrak Cascades preparing?
Well, we started looking at adding additional service between Seattle and Vancouver, BC a couple of years ago, because both of the venues, both in Seattle and Vancouver, are right next to the train stations, so it was a natural fit. So we began doing that planning for it, but we weren't able to get approval from BNSF Railway for an additional round trip, and also as Amtrak was coming out of COVID, equipment shortages, staffing shortages. So we tried to kind of move something forward where we would have additional service, which is also going to cost money to provide for that additional service. And that money was not provided. And Amtrak said we don't have the staffing, and BNSF was not going to give us a commitment for a third round trip. So we'd already
Because it's their tracks.
Because it's their tracks. So what we have done instead is we're just going to try to maximize what we have right now, which is we're going to stay in the same schedules between Seattle and Vancouver, BC, and also between Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, BC. But the things that we're going to do to enhance the service, we're going to put on some additional staff. We're going to have additional staff at the train stations. We're going to improve the wayfinding signage. These are the types of things that we're going to be doing to try to maximize the benefit of passenger rail during the World Cup.
I know that, and we're going to talk about this, efforts to expand and modernize this service, but there was a step back with the removal of the Horizon train sets, which had some, was it rust issues? Yeah,
it was some corrosion that they discovered in a place that was unexpected. And this happened back in March of last year. And so Amtrak, to their credit, erring on the side of caution, immediately pulled all that equipment out of service, which was the majority of the cars we used for Amtrak Cascades. So we had suspended service for a short period of time, but to Amtrak's credit, they were able to deploy Amfleet 1s, it's a type of rail car, from other parts of the United States and bring them out here to the Pacific Northwest and began operating them immediately. So all of our train schedules, our daily routes that we have for the Cascades, were filled with this equipment. But the trade-off was that the equipment had far fewer seats than the Horizon cars. So that's the reason why our ridership, we were expected to have ridership last year exceed 1 million riders for the first time in program history, but we weren't able to achieve that goal because we had fewer seats available.
Do you know what you're on track to be able to do this year with this?
We're shooting at getting right around 1 million, because as the new equipment that we'll be speaking about comes into service, it has significantly more seating. So we think we're going to get real close to 1 million this year.
But the reality is, going into this summer, you are operating with sort of diminished or reduced passenger capacity, and you weren't able to get the additional capacity, short-term capacity you were hoping for. So these trains are going to fill fast. I guess they already are, right?
Yes.
We're seeing reservations for some of the trains. I think the numbers that I saw were that you've got some of the most popular routes are already 75% sold out.
So one thing just I can add is we had a meeting in Seattle last week with the CEO of Amtrak talking about a host of other things. And I asked him if they could bring out just one more coach car, one more Amfleet car to put on our train 516, 519. It goes from Seattle up to Vancouver and comes back. We could just add one more car. That's all we ask is for one. I said, it's the World Cup. It's the biggest sporting event in the world. Can you give me one car? And they went back and they're looking at it right now. So, because we told them we'd sell it out in like 5 minutes.
Wow.
For the whole month. So we're hoping to add a little more capacity between Seattle and Vancouver for the games.
But no promises yet, but the ask is in. Okay, so looking forward, there is this anticipated arrival of new Airo train sets to replace these M1s. Is that what they're called?
Amfleet 1s,
Amfleet 1s. They aren't going to be ready in time for the World Cup, which is disappointing, I know. But tell us a little bit about these new train sets And let's start with what are they and what's required to get them into operation in terms of testing and so forth.
Right, so these trains are manufactured in Sacramento, California by Siemens Mobility. And we're getting 8 of these train sets.
And a train set is the whole kit and caboodle from locomotive to...
It's a 6-car set, so there's a business car, 3 coach cars, a cafe car, and a cab car, and then a locomotive that will be added onto it. So we're getting...
So you're getting 8 of them?
8 of them, yes.
8 brand new ones. Okay.
8 brand new ones. So what the pattern is that they come out of the factory in Sacramento. The first one, the prototype, goes down to a test track in Pueblo, Colorado, and does some basic testing down there. And then they're moved by rail over to the Northeast Corridor that is owned by Amtrak.
Across the country.
All the way across the country. And the reason that they're moved over there is because Amtrak owns the Northeast Corridor. And so for the testing, the track testing, the initial track testing, we get track and time from the Amtrak dispatchers. So it's a more efficient way to do the testing of the equipment. So, and that's going on right now. Train set number 1 and train set number 2 are back on the Northeast Corridor. Train set number 3 is leaving Sacramento for Philadelphia tomorrow morning, so they're on their way. So the first train set that's coming here to the Pacific Northwest for more corridor testing will be here in about a month. And then the next train set will come in, and the next train set will come in. And so our plan is that once we have 3 train sets here, the new ones, then we're going to begin revenue service on a couple parts of the route. And we're looking to do that in the fall. And then as the additional trains come in and go through their corridor testing here in the Pacific Northwest, then we intend to have all 8 in revenue service before Christmas of this year.
Before Christmas of this year.
Christmas,
Okay.
yeah.
So while there's a wait, the light at the end of the tunnel is here.
It is, and it's a very bright light. It's
And
beautiful.
why is that? How will this upgrade change the service that people experience?
In many ways. The first one, we've been talking about seating inventory. These new trains have 300 seats each. So that's the first thing. They're beautiful. I was lucky enough to be at an event in Washington, D.C. on February 11th and got to go through them the night before and during this event. They are absolutely beautiful. Very comfortable seats. They have very spacious ADA restrooms. We have car-borne wheelchair lifts for the ADA community. They have big spacious windows. And we have like a reading light that's right above your seat. We have USB ports, plug-ins, an upgraded food service car, and a really beautiful business class car as well. So they're state-of-the-art, very bright, and just really comfortable. And because their trains are permanently coupled train sets, the ride quality that our passengers will experience will be an improvement over the equipment we have today.
So that's new, that's exciting, and when people board the train, they'll have a upgraded experience. It doesn't change the fact that you are operating the Amtrak Cascades, and we should remind people it's Vancouver all the way down to Eugene,
Oregon, 461 miles, yes.
And points in between, and you're doing this on freight rail tracks.
That's right.
And so reliability, on-time performance has been an ongoing issue.
Yes, it is. Yep.
The legislature last year passed a law sort of setting performance standards, if you will, or
Yes.
guidelines, expectations over the next decade
Yeah.
in terms of on-time and reliability. What does that future look like when you don't have your own dedicated line?
Well, we are right now on the brink of beginning a new service plan. It's called the Amtrak Cascades Service Development Plan. And that is partially funded, or mostly funded, by the Federal Railroad Administration. And that is going to serve as our blueprint for growth for Amtrak Cascades going out the next 20 or 30 years. So we already know where the choke points are on the railroad, where there's congestion, where we have delays. So we're going to develop an incremental plan on how to add additional round trips between Seattle and Portland and Seattle and Vancouver, BC. But we have to identify the additional infrastructure that needs to be created in order to create sufficient railroad capacity so that our trains can run on time, but so can the freight trains. So we look at the modeling, we look at what they're operating now and what their projected growth is going to be for freight movements, and then we build the infrastructure to accommodate both services.
The legislature wants significant improvement in punctuality.
Yes.
What's the reality check that you would say to lawmakers and to passengers about the ability to improve that over the next decade?
I think that with capacity improvements, we can get closer to the goal of 88%. I think so. But I
And
think
where are you right now?
as of me checking this morning for this year, we're at about 66. And we've had some really good months for the last several months. But right now, with some of the commodity traffic is increasing, we're seeing our number right around 60, 66 right now, dropping down a little bit.
And 88 is the
That's
goal?
the target
And
goal.
you think, and that would be over the next 10 years?
We're going to strive for it.
What is the biggest sort of situation that creates a delay? Is it that the Amtrak Cascades actually has to stop and let the freight traffic go? Does it not get out of the station because there's a choke point or a bottleneck? How does this manifest?
Well, the delays that we experience the most often are freight train interference and passenger train interference. And these really are a function of the capacity of the railroad. The railroad between Seattle and Portland is all double track with a few triple track sections. The railroad between Portland and Eugene is almost all single track. We have combination of single track between Seattle and Everett, single and double, and then going up into Canada, it's almost all single track until we get to the Fraser River Bridge. Then it's combinations of double and triple track going into the train station up there. So
you're basically trying to jump on this single track during a gap in the freight trains and do your
that's how the schedules are set up.
do your trip,
Right.
And then get out of the way, and here comes the,
So often we can stay in slot, but there's a number of things that do cause us delays that are things that are like third-party delays. So, for example, a car is out on the railroad tracks. Unfortunately, or there's a trespasser incident. We have 8 movable bridges on our 461-mile corridor, and most of them are over 100 years old. So we'll see delays that are incurred when the steel swells in the summertime, and the bridges don't seat right back in. So you get a red signal maintainer has to come out and do it. So there's a number of different things that cause delays to our trains, and not to mention we've got the Port of Portland, Port of Vancouver, Port of Kalama, Port of Longview, Port of Tacoma, Port of Seattle, the refineries up around Cherry Point and Anacortes, and then the big ports that are up in British Columbia. So there's a lot of traffic out there, and this is why it's going to be really important for us to build additional infrastructure so we can get that 88% on-time performance, reliability every day.
I know there's been some talk about laying our own track and not just relying on the freight.
Well, that's what we would effectively be doing. It wouldn't be exclusively for our use, but we've got looking at plans for triple track sections up and down the corridor.
Is there the space to do that?
Yes,
So it's really a matter of funding.
it is.
And would that be the responsibility of the states, Washington and Oregon?
Well, yes. Well, the plan is right now is that we would pursue federal dollars. And generally, federal grant programs for passenger rail are an 80-20 match. So 80% from the federal government, but the states of Washington and Oregon would be responsible for the other 20%.
And how feasible does that seem in the current budget environment, both federally and at the state level?
I think it'll be a challenge, but I do believe that intercity passenger rail is very popular. Ridership's going up. There's a variety of reasons why people want more of it. So I really do believe that despite contemporary political scene, that the future still will provide us with funding to grow the service. Perhaps not as rapidly as we'd like, but we really do believe that there's the demand is there and the political will is there and will be there.
I should also ask you about the new Seattle area maintenance facility, which I think is also intended to improve reliability and turnaround times.
Yes.
Tell us about this facility and how is it different from what you're working with right now?
It is customized for the new train sets. So the length of the tracks that are inside it, it's all set up to be maintaining what they're called the Airo train sets. That's what it's for. And so it's a $300 million facility funded entirely by the federal government. It's about maybe halfway done right now. It's a very big building. It's right up at Holgate Street, right next to the Amtrak headquarters. So it is different than the other buildings that are up there because it's customized for this equipment.
And how will that help with maintenance and keeping the trains running on time?
Well, it's all indoor, And we have some special features that are inside the building. So it's elevated tracks so the men and women who are maintaining the trains can go underneath them. It's designed for continuous maintenance. It's a certain practice where the maintenance people, they'll know when the train comes in, whatever train it is, what they're going to be working on that night, and they can do it all as a single unit. So there's a great efficiency with that arrangement.
What about high-speed rail? And I know that there's kind of ongoing talk about it. I also know that California's tried to do it, and it's, some would say been a boondoggle. It certainly ended up costing a lot more, and they haven't gotten a huge return yet on that investment. Yep. But there are still those here in the Northwest who'd like to see high-speed rail come. Where do those conversations stand right now?
Right now, there is a feasibility study that's underway. The federal government funded it. It's over $50 million that's looking at a lot of different things for high-speed rail. So that is underway right now. But people have asked me often if that high-speed rail service were to come to pass, would it replace Amtrak Cascades? And the answer is no, it wouldn't. It would be a complementary service for us. So there's a long ways to go for high-speed rail here in the Pacific Northwest. And as I say, that feasibility study is underway. But for me, in my position, I'm really focused on making the best of Amtrak Cascades.
Do you think high-speed rail is in our future, or is that still a big question mark?
I think it's a big question mark, but however, the demand, we know what the projections are for our population in this region of the North America. We know that the economy is going to grow. We know we can only do so much with Interstate 5. We know there's only so much capacity up at SeaTac for additional service. So I think that the need for it is there, definitely.
And what is the future horizon for Amtrak Cascades? And so we've established that the trains run on BNSF tracks. Yeah. Help us understand the other, like, what's Amtrak's role in this? What's WSDOT's role in this? And then I thought at one point Sound Transit had a role.
Everybody has a role, as you've described. So for us at the state of Washington, it's our intercity passenger rail program under the portfolio of the Department of Transportation. We hire Amtrak as our contracted operator for the regional service known as Amtrak Cascades. So we have an operating agreement.
So it's their engineers,
yes,
and their staff
that's right, and their mechanics and their staff at the stations. All of their responsibilities and deliverables are outlined in our operating agreement, annual operating agreement. And then, so there's also the Amtrak long distance service that's here in the Pacific Northwest, one that goes east-west called the Empire Builder. That's all funded entirely by Amtrak. And we also have the north-south service that's called the Coast Starlight, again, exclusively funded by Amtrak. And then our partners, Sound Transit, we have a number of stations that we share. And we also operate on their railroad, which is a 21-mile section of railroad between Nisqually Junction and Tacoma.
That's so that you don't now have to go along the water anymore. It's the cutoff.
So we've got multiple partnerships with the host railroads, Amtrak, Sound Transit, of course the federal government, then the border agencies that are working on screening our passengers up at the train station up in Vancouver, British Columbia. So there's a lot of relationships that WSDOT has to manage to maintain and grow Amtrak Cascade service.
Of course, we're coming up nearing a decade, not quite, on the derailment of Amtrak Cascades 501.
Yes.
3 lives were lost, dozens injured. That was an inaugural run of a train using that.
That's right.
That Sound Transit stretch came around the curve too fast. One of the big things that was discussed at the time was this move to positive train control, PTC.
Yes.
Can you just update us on, is that fully implemented now?
Yep, that was fully implemented.
I know it was in the process when this happened.
That's right. So the requirement was that had by the federal government gave the mandate to all the railroads across the United States that PTC needed to be in place by the end of 2020. So it wasn't in place at the time of the derailment.
Which was December 2017.
Yes, and so it is in place now on all of the railroad that we operate on, and it's functioning as intended.
And sticking with safety, given that you're sharing these tracks with freight trains, and I would just, we do hear from time to time about train catastrophes around the world.
Right.
Obviously, it's safer than traveling by automobile.
Yeah.
But can you tell us a little bit about the the safety mechanisms and conversations that are in place to make sure that there is not a conflict between an Amtrak Cascades and a freight train?
Well, that's what PTC does. And so PTC is a system that is monitoring the movement of trains. And if a train is going too fast or is heading for a collision with another train or is going into a work zone where people are out working on the train, on the tracks, the system will go into emergency brake and stop the train.
So the trains, in essence, are talking to each other.
Yes,
They're
they
aware
are.
of what's
Yep, the
going on.
trains are talking to each other. They're talking to the signal system. They're talking to satellites. They're talking to the host railroads, their big computers that they have. So there's a lot of communication that's going on to preserve that safety.
And let me sort of throw the question at you in another kind of context. We're hearing so much about air traffic control right now and the safety of the skies and confusion that happens. We just had an incident at LaGuardia. You've got air traffic controllers who are overwhelmed. In this realm, I imagine there's people constantly looking at this.
Yes.
What is the training regimen like, or do you have the people you need in that next generation coming up of people who are in the train traffic control business?
Yeah, that's the responsibility of the host railroad. So most of the trains that are operating here in the Pacific Northwest are dispatched and controlled by BNSF Railway out of their control center in Fort Worth, Texas.
Oh.
So the state of Washington doesn't have a role in that.
And Amtrak doesn't have a direct role
They
in
do
that.
where they own the tracks. So, for example, I'd mentioned the
Yeah, on the
Northeast Corridor.
Northeast,
They do
yeah.
all of those things.
But
So
if it's BNSF's tracks, it's they're the
that's
ones
correct.
doing it.
Yep. And that's the same down Portland down to Eugene. That's Union Pacific. And then for a small section of track on our railroad between the Fraser River Bridge and downtown Vancouver, that's dispatched and controlled by Canadian National.
What would you say about your confidence for the traveling public?
It's very high.
Safety of this.
It's very high.
Given the frustration of people, a lot of people really like to travel by rail. Well, people go around the world and see what it's like when the system's fully built out. Here it can be really frustrating. So we
Yes.
might get on these new train sets and really enjoy the amenities and have the same frustrations and headaches that it's not a more efficient trip. And you've talked about the goal over the next 10 years, but can you speak just to the constraints of the system, the fact that we are placing passenger rail on freight lines. We don't have our own dedicated line out here. And sort of the promise and the peril of trying to deliver on a reliable service like this.
Well, it is a challenge. I'll acknowledge that. And I think that's the number one metric that our customers are looking at is they want that reliability. And this is one of the reasons that we haven't been able to break into, for example, the business traveler market because they're time sensitive. So the majority of our travelers are leisure travelers and people that don't have to be at their destination at a precise time. But this is something we're going to continue to work on it every day. I monitor the on-time performance of Amtrak Cascades every morning, including the weekends. So I know what's happening out on the railroad. But it's really about the business relationship between Amtrak, WSDOT, and BNSF and Union Pacific to make sure that they recognize the importance of the on-time performance to us is so critical to the success of our program. So we're in constant conversations with them. But it can be a challenge because the infrastructure is very expensive to build. It takes a long time to build it. And traffic can fluctuate in and out of the ports on a daily basis. So it's something that is going to continue to be a priority for us to try to get our trains running on time as often as possible.
Is there any talk of expanding Amtrak Cascades service beyond this central Puget Sound down to Oregon, kind of I-5 corridor?
Well, there's a lot of rail advocates here in the state, well, across the country. Rail's played a very prominent role in American history, and that means a lot of people are very interested in seeing more. There's multiple benefits that come out of passenger rail: environmental, economic, congestion relief. So there are advocates that are out there that would like to see east-west service restored here in the state of Washington.
Would that be like Seattle to Spokane?
It could be.
Seattle to
There's
Wenatchee,
3
or-
east-west routes in the state of Washington. One's up at Stevens Pass. This is where the Empire Builder travels between Seattle and Spokane. Then there's the other one that's down on the Columbia River. And then there's one that bisects the state, and that's the original east-west line here, and that's called the Stampede Line. That goes from Pasco, Yakima, Ellensburg, up through the mountains through the Stampede Tunnel, and then down into Auburn. So, and on that central route that I just mentioned, the train stations that were built way back when, they're still there.
So you could potentially do this. I need to stop you there, but it's something people can dream about. Not
Yes.
happening tomorrow.
No.
Okay. Kirk Fredrickson with Washington State Department of Transportation Passenger Rail, thank you so much for coming in and talking about this.
Thank you.
And we have those train sets to look forward to. Thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We'll see you again next week.